everybody. Welcome to the Atlantic Hill podcast. We have Susan. And Susan, how do you say your last name so I pronounce it?
Coll-Guedes.
Coll-Guedes, and she is one of our board members at the Atlantic Hill, and she has a magnificent background in advocacy and understanding kind of ableism and what is going on in the disability world. And I think it's just so important now because I think the pandemic really highlighted a lot of things that people with disabilities have been saying are wrong with the system, hopefully, and we're trying to get people to acknowledge that. I think there was a lot of success at the beginning. Now, as people have gotten tired of the pandemic, they've kind of just gotten over everything. So I worry about that a little bit. But Susan, thank you for joining us, and give us a little introduction about yourself before we get
Thanks
into
for
our
having
topic.
me. I appreciate it. I feel like I am like an unintentional advocate. Like it's just something that it just happened, and like my awareness of disability sort of like happened in a really haphazard and strange way. So my name is Susan Coll-Guedes. I'm here in Atlantic County, and I have 3 kids with disabilities, various disabilities, and I'm a person with a disability myself. But my story is that I didn't learn that I was disabled until I was an adult, and part of that was the system of people not telling me and hiding it on purpose, and just to see like sort of this experiment of what would happen. And then having my oldest son, he's 21, his name's Alex, and he has significant disabilities, and he was declared very early, like at age 2 by the state of New Jersey, as an institutional level of care, and being blindsided by what does that even mean in the year 2002. And what does that mean in 2010? And what does that mean now in 2022 to be at an institutional level of care when there are no institutions? And for him to have been born in 2000, in a time where no one came to me and said, because he was born, and we realized after he was born that he had Down syndrome and significant medical complications, no one came to me and said, do you want to take him home, or you can leave him here? It would be fine. And I know that if it was my generation, the time when I was born in the early 1970s, that was definitely a thing, because that's a part of my story of being born to a person who was in an institutional setting at the time, and then being given up to the state, and for them seeing me and putting me, documenting that they thought I had Down syndrome, but I did not. And then later getting adopted into a family who decided to completely hide my disability and my story. And honestly, they didn't know much anyway. And then to try to raise me as a non-disabled person, and going through school with an IEP and not having awareness of that, and then just sort of stumbling through life, and then finding out in adulthood that I was adopted. So that was like part of my story too. And then finding out that I was disabled. And I only found that information out when I got my birth story through the state, and also through my oldest son, Alex, getting more diagnoses that had more things to do with like sort of genetic things. So over the years, like my experience with Alex, and then with myself with ableism and discrimination, and just trying to be an advocate, I've kind of sort of unintentionally become this, and I feel like I've been somewhat successful and been able to help other people. So I use my story in a way to bring awareness and hopefully inspire some empathy and compassion for people, and a deeper understanding that, you know, there's ways to work with people with disabilities that still preserve dignity.
And how would you, I mean, ableism is a word that I didn't start hearing till I was in college. And I thought, you know, that was kind of a moment of realizing that maybe I was privileged in some way. I had a supportive family and a lot of great advocates around me, and a lot of great people with the great mindset. Like I remember just my dad and mom being like, so when you go to college and when you get a job, like that presumption of like, of course you're gonna do these things, live this life. But how would you define ableism? So, because I think it's a real important word for people to really understand.
Yeah, you know, I feel like too, I hadn't heard about it until recently, and recently being like the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, where people are really starting to use it more often. When I started teaching, I teach a special education course at Moore College of Art and Design. And I started teaching there in 2015. And I think maybe the first or second semesters, I hadn't heard of it. And then I started to use it in my course and talking about what ableism is. And to boil it down to the most essential fact of it's discrimination against people with disabilities. And this happens in a lot of different ways. And it happens a lot just even internally, but even for disabled people, sort of having the owner, this idea of internalized ableism, which is just preferring the non-disability, the people who are able to do things. And I see it as definitely like towards physical disabilities, but then also towards mental health disabilities. And those things too, I find like sort of breaking down those barriers are a little bit harder. Although I have to say that I think with like things like TikTok, there is like a little bit with social media where I feel like people are getting more awareness and it's actually helping. I feel like in the last 7 years from like 2015 to like 2022 that there is way more understanding of ableism and people trying to like check themselves.
I agree with that, because like I said, even the fact that we're using this word is like a new, because like you said, I didn't hear it for the longest time, and I think your definition is good. I love the way you said that, preferring people without disabilities to people with disabilities, and we can see this kind of all over our system of like, we prefer you to work instead of not work. If you are working, we prefer people without disabilities to be, and people are to come out, people never come out and say that, or politicians never going to come out and say, my platform is forget this disabled people, but it's just kind of that underlining assumption or presumption of like, you can just tell. I mean, even we see this with the pandemic, it's like, well, aren't us not non-disabled people, we're good, we've moved on, and all we have to worry about is kind of those disabled people with their pre-existing conditions. So the pandemic's over because they don't really count anyway. It's like that underlying assumption of it. So yeah, I just think it's important for people to realize that that's in the system, and kind of how do we address that in like a strategic way?
I think about like education, and there was a in the middle, like let's say 2006 to 2012, I worked for SPAN Advocacy, and what a great group that was. It was known as the Statewide Parent Advocacy Network for a while. And part of that was this understanding that this sort of societal change kind of occurs with lawsuits. Isn't this awful? But it's really true. You think about like Brown versus the Board of Education, or Section 504, or ADA. All of this is like legislation, or people saying things like, you know what? You need to know that this is wrong and you need to stop. We need to stop. And we have to actually make a law. So one of the things that happened in 2020 was there was a law that was made that we had to teach about disability in K through 12 in an age appropriate way, that we had to look at the accomplishments of people with disability and somehow include that in the curriculum. And I've seen that even with my own children, how that has made its way into the curriculum, where my second grader came home and was trained all on Helen Keller and blindness and deafness, and came home with like quite an understanding. And I know that for my son, who's older, he did not have that same information in the curriculum, even though they were in the same school district. So I know that change is possible, and a big part of change is education and awareness.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's important to realize that change is possible. I know I can get you can get discouraged. It's like, oh, like we're fighting this fight and it's never going to be won. But then, you look at the victories you have had. Like you said, you were talking about TikTok and people getting more awareness. Also, the idea of people just having a disability identity and kind of just owning that is kind of, I was never like, I never hid my CP because it's kind of obvious. It's not but like kind of this whole, not only do I have a disability, but I'm proud of it and I'm going to demand what I need and I'm going to say what it is instead of like always making people comfortable about it. I think that's like a real successful thing that I think the advocates, especially younger, should be proud of. Because like you were talking about when you were growing up, it was like, let's hide it. And that's all the ableism too, that internal ableism of let's hide it. Like I'm sure your parents and the people who loved you thought they were doing the right thing. They're just protecting you from the world and trying to make your life easier. So it's just, I think we're getting better at like, no, like at least recognizing it and at least being like, no, I have a disability and I'm not going anywhere. So let's figure out a way to deal with it. Do you think that, or what do you think?
I do. Honestly, I really feel like it is that the terminology of like being in the closet or out of the closet for somebody who has sort of a not well hidden disability though, right? So for people with like sort of obvious disabilities, right, there's no hiding it. And then for people with, I would think like mental health issues, or for me with like my particular genetic condition, there was a time where the choice was made to have me pass and to not talk about that I didn't walk right away or that I needed like leg braces or special shoes or or things like, I just remember like a big part of my childhood is just being like, why am I in pain? And no one's telling me why I'm in pain. Or in fact, that people were instead saying like, you're not in pain when you're actually in pain. Right. And you're like, okay, I'm not sure what this means. And the sort of like the feeling of being othered, of I'm supposed to be like everybody else, but I'm physically not able to do the things. Like I really remember like not being able to do a cartwheel, and how I'm like, oh, here I am telling you this, right? Like, what's wrong with me? That is something that I wish people would have just said to me, like, you are physically not able to do this, so stop trying. Like, there is no way you by yourself can do this, right? But like, that is like one of the things that sort of marked my childhood of like, why is everybody else able to do this? This is like one of those clues of like, oh, something's going on that I'm not able to do this. Or you just that feeling of there's something wrong with me, but people won't talk about there's something wrong. And then once you're able to like get to this place of, oh, my body is not able to do that, and it's okay. And then you move on, you actually don't feel bad about it, because then you're like, oh, let me go do stuff I can do, and I could do really well, and like not feel bad about that.
Right. And I think that's such an important point. It's the refusing to talk about it and the stigmatizing that makes it the issue. Like, if like we were talking about that moment about doing a cartwheel, I was thinking like the first time I kind of noticed, even though you're younger and you know there's some walking differently, but I noticed like my parents tried to have me ride a bike, and I was like, I tried, and I'm like, look, I'm not riding this bike. This is gonna be a thing. This is happening. And like just knowing, because one, I couldn't hide my disability, and two, but was more freely talked about. It was just okay. I got a disability. I can, and it was always like, well, you can do other things, but you're not gonna ride this bike. It was better than like, let's pretend like something's wrong, because really nothing's wrong. It's I think what kind of our mission is at the Sill, and what you've been fighting for is we're just trying to normalize disability. Disability is a part of nature, you know. And it's the same struggle that I think a lot of civil rights organizations have, like the gay rights organizations have had. It's like society has tried to tell us that there's something wrong. And it's like, no, they're disabled people, they're gay people, they're trans. And it's just, there's a lot of people in the world that are different. And the more we can get society to kind of just acknowledge that and accommodate that and understand that and value that is, I think, kind of our role. But so much problems and so much people's internalized ableism. Like if people would just acknowledge it off the, you know, no, you just have a disability. You're not doing that cartwheel. It's okay.
Move along.
It's okay. You know, like I used to always joke. I think I was like in sixth grade, and I used to go like somewhere along the lines. I realized I wasn't going to be a basketball star, so like I realized that was out, which is fine. But when you treat it like, oh, let's not say you're not in pain, you know,
right.
You know, even the stuff with me that I think about that people thought was well-intentioned, but kind of drives me a little, you know, I think was wrong. Like the whole, like, you're so special and, you know, you're so, you know, like, no, I'm really not that special. It's just the disability, you know, but it's just like a friendlier way of kind of stigmatizing it in a different way. Like everybody's disabled in their own way. Like, not really. Like, no. Like, no, you're not disabled. I got CP. That person over there without the CP doesn't have it. so you know, looking back, and again, that's a little different than the just the let's pretend it's not happening, but it's like, I don't know. Like that doesn't help either. Like I just like saying I have a disability and this is what I need and this is what I don't need. And if I need help with this, I'll let you know. And that's it. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about that you have a lot of knowledge about is kind of institutionalization. And you were talking about how New Jersey, you know, they have people who need specialized care like your son, but now we don't have a lot of developmental centers. And I know all this stuff is like very controversial and there's a lot of opinions both ways in the disability community. And I think you have a great insight as somebody dedicated to the independent living movement and self-determination, but also realizing that there is a population that needs to be served that sometimes gets left out, even by the independent living community sometimes. So I just wanted to let you talk about that.
Sure. When I talk about Alex, I'm talking about a person with the most significant, support needs. So he has a feeding tube. He can stand and walk for short periods of time, but he uses wheelchair, and he needs help with basically all activities, like all activities of daily living. And he has problems with sort of speech and communication. I'm trying to think like all areas. I'm trying to think of all areas. So when he turned 18, people were just like, hey, you need to get guardianship over him. And I was like, look, if I get guardianship over Alex, people who already don't acknowledge him as a human being are going to like even more not listen to him. So for that one thing, I'm doing supported decision making. And I could say, again, this is another thing, like from 2015 to today, from being in a place of no one saying that ever to a place of people having an understanding of like, there's alternatives to guardianship. We can do this and allow him to be, seen as an adult and have choices in his life and have a certain amount of say over his life instead of mom or another appointed person always being in control. And I wanted that because I wanted to be checked. I wanted people to check me because I know that I'm his mom and I'm going to always see it from the perspective of the mom, right? And wanting safety for him and wanting certain things. But I think I wanted him to have that experience of like adulthood and people going to him first, and that forced it. And it seems like risky to a lot of people, but I do want people to be aware that Alex is now 21, he's going to be 22, and we're doing supported decision making, and it's between him, me, his mom, his dad, and he's got these two nurses who are really dedicated to him and to his life. So when we talk about like the most significant needs, usually people in the past would be like immediately from birth or early childhood, they would be at a developmental center, an institutional setting where there's staff to take care of them. And we have Woodbine down in Cape May County, and it's not accepting any new admissions. I think if there was an emergency that they would do that. But really, I think one of the institutional settings right now, they're group homes and they're sort of scattered. It's like you have to know somebody who knows somebody. But I know, knowing Alex and knowing that I don't have guardianship, so I can't just say, be gone with you to this group home. And I don't want to say that group homes, I don't want to paint a brush of these, of all things are bad. But I know for Alex and for his life and what he wants, he doesn't want to do a day program. What's tough for people who have that medical aspect where he needs really 24-hour nursing care. It becomes really difficult in adulthood to stay at home or in a community setting. It almost defaults into you have to go to a medical group home. And he's a person who, when he was a kid, he could have gone to like a Voorhees pediatric facility. He could have been one of those people who was like an inpatient, sort of like living in those facilities. Like the level of need, the level of care is so difficult because of the nursing care element. So I knew for him that he wanted to direct his own life and do the things that he wanted to do. And like, it's tough. New Jersey is a work first state. Talk about ableism. New Jersey says everybody should be working. And then if you're not, what's wrong with you, right? What's wrong with you? You can't be working. And I'm like, well, he's got the most significant disabilities and needs help with every single activity. So he cannot work. He can't work, but he still wants to have like control and choices in his life. So that's been really, really difficult. And for us, it's been difficult because it's really reliant on Medicaid and Social Security. And each state writes the rules for how those programs work. So it's very dependent on where you live. So Medicaid looks very different in Pennsylvania or New York or Delaware or Florida than it does in New Jersey. And the way New Jersey writes their waivers, they've written out people with nursing care to get into this community care plan, which is the most comprehensive plan for the people with the most significant disabilities. So for our circumstance, we're in a tough situation right now where we can't access the proper supports to really keep Alex in the community. And I'm working with senators, I'm working with people at Department of Human Services, and working with insurance agencies who provide the nursing to try to say, hey, you know what? He doesn't want to do a medical group home where they're going to tell him what to do all day and make his schedule and kind of just keep him clean and fed. He wants to live his life and have dignity in his life and direct his own life. So how can we do this and have the proper supports in place? And I know that there's not a lot of families like us. Sometimes they'll say things like, there's 4 of you in the state of New Jersey. They'll say, like, people at the state will be like, just want to let you know, Alex is probably one of the top 4 most disabled people in New Jersey. And I'm like, well,
we rank them. We rank them, and we put Alex on the list.
Right. I'm like, that is an achievement. Are we going to get like something on letterhead that states
Yes.
that? I'm like, yes, I know. This has been very hard trying to figure these things out for Alex to have like the things that he wants in his adult life. And what does he want? He wants the things that everybody wants, right? He wants to like wake up and do the things that he wants to do when he wants to do it. But it's talking about ableism and like sort of like autonomy and bodily autonomy. When you're a person with a kind of disability that you need people to help with like all the things, I don't want to say it's dangerous, but people really don't see you as like a full human being. They just do things, right? This is like when I think about people doing hand over hand, I really don't like hand over hand. I like when people are like, ask permission. Do you want me to help you do this? Or should we just change like what we're doing so you can actually do the thing, right?
There's so much I agree with you on this. I have cerebral palsy. And I've been in hospitals and I've been in surgeries. And the amount of people, and I get it, people need to do things when you have needs, but the amount of people who have just grabbed me and like not asked and like, and all you have to do is say, okay, I need to do this. Like, you know, are you cool? Are you comfortable? But, and I know, again, I'm not saying, this is where we talk about the ableism, because I think when you and I talk, Susan, it's like we're thinking, it's not like we think all these people are like evil, like I'm going to go out there and violate this person's boundaries, but it's just this assumption like, well, I'm the nurse or the doctor, and if I need to touch this person and they have a disability and I'm helping, but like, just that little thing of acknowledging, like, are you okay if I do this? Like, it's really important to me. And I just wanted you to define a little bit supportive decision-making, because people don't even know there's an alternative to guardianship. And I think I really want to credit Britney Spears for bringing guardianship to the forefront, because that's what I've started getting obsessed with, like supportive decision making and alternatives, because I really wanted to learn about this, because I have, not that I think there's absolutely no place for guardianship, but it does seem like people get funneled into it. Like, it does seem like it's like, if you have a child that has a lot of needs with a disability, you kind of get right away, or you get guardianship like you were. When you get guardianship, when are you going to get guardianship? You're going to get guardianship without knowing that there's this alternative. So can you define supportive decision making for us?
Sure. And I feel like if you even do a Google search, like I'm always going back from 2015 to 2022. If you did this like in 2015, you would find nothing. If you do it now, you'll find all of these websites that explain sort of the hierarchy of most restrictive to least restrictive. So when you think about restrictive, which is like giving people choices and autonomy in their life. So supportive decision-making as an alternative to guardianship is saying that that person still has choices in their life, but they're going to invite people in to help them to make the right decisions. So often people will say, no, wait, if I don't get guardianship, what happens if my person's in the hospital? What happens like with financial decisions? Like all these, this is terrible. Like terrible things are going to happen. And I know for being within the Down syndrome community, I would say probably from infancy and childhood, we are told, and it is passed on, and like the tales of parents before us, you need to get guardianship, or you get ready, you need to get guardianship at 18. And then of course, me being me, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think so. Let's see. So all the things, right? So here's all the things. He gets Social Security, but you could be a representative payee. You don't have to be the guardian to manage their Social Security and take care of, you know, that sort of financial piece to it, you know, as needed. Also medical things. Alex has been in the hospital in multiple places in multiple states since the age of 18. He sees doctors in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And in general, they'll have a form. Sometimes it's a once a year form that you need to sign and he needs to sign. With health insurance benefits, they'll email or mail a form to us and they'll say, hey, just fill this out, have him sign it and you sign it. I think this has to do, talking about ableism, it has to do too with what does it mean to be incapacitated, right? Or that's the thing that I always struggle with. I'm like, look, Alex might be illiterate, right? And that's powerful to say that. He can't read and write. Does that give him no autonomy or choices in his life because he can't read or write? He might not be able to like speak in perfect full sentences that are grammatically correct 100% of the time. Does that mean he gets no choices in his life or autonomy in his life? So that's the way I look at supported decision making. 100% he can tell you what he wants and what he doesn't want. It might not be the way that you sort of like he's writing paragraphs. He can't like give a stand up and say a big speech, but you 100% know what it is that he wants at that time and what he thinks is the direction to go in. And then certain other things, you might need to be like, the team has to work with you to let you know, like, hey, we got to do this thing. You got to take care of this thing. I think this is the right thing for you. Oh, okay. Right. So that's where it's important. So we've been able to manage supported decision making now for 4 years, and the hurdles of the medical, the financial, working with the insurance, we've gotten through all these things. And he's had some major things. He's had like double hip replacement since age 18. Major medical decisions have had to be made. And when I walk in there and I said, we're doing supported decision making, everybody was like, we understand, we know. In Pennsylvania, we go to bigger places. I'll have to say that too. We go to places where people know, and that makes the difference too.
Right, and I think it's so, through supportive decision making, so Alex he appoints kind of like a council, like his advocates, like you're in it, 2 nurses are in it, and he has some control, but he also has support. It's a great addition where he gets the support he needs, but also is the one ultimately driving the bus or driving the train or whatever he's driving. And I think that's so important, because I guarantee you that's a lot better for his self-esteem and vision of himself. Because trust me, I mean, people with disabilities, we realize when people are taking power away from us, and we realize, just like anybody else would, and it really gets to you in a lot of ways. It really sends messages to you that are unhealthy. And I just, I'm not, just like Susan was saying, we're not saying everybody's situation is the same or everybody's in Alex's situation, but I would just like more people to be educated on supportive decision making so they can decide what's best for them and their family. I would like more people with disabilities to know about it so they can ask about it. Like, wait a minute, why are we doing guardianship? Why can't we be doing this? And I would like more parents to know about it, because I think a lot of parents would be interested in it. But when you're told, again, going back to ableism, that it's either this or the person you love is completely going to be taken advantage of, and if something bad happens, you can get a lot of people to sign up for guardianship if it's framed that way. So the other thing about ableism I wanted to talk to you about, Susan, is I'm always worried about, I know safety with people with disabilities is an extremely important thing, but I always feel like you got to be a little careful with it, because sometimes it's used as a way to take people with disabilities rights away. Like, oh, that's too dangerous. A person with disability can't do that. Oh, if you let them do supportive decision making, they could make the wrong decision. And I just think of that, and I'm thinking, you think of that and you're like, wait, that sounds makes a little bit of sense. But you think about that and you think, wait a minute, non-disabled people make bad decisions every day, all day, and they do risky things every day, all day. And I've had instances where people have said to me, well, you can't go there because you might get hurt. And I'm like, well, so could you. So I just wanted to talk about, I'm not saying safety is not an important issue. When we have a disability, you do have to think about it because it is a different scenario. But I get a little worried when I hear that sometimes, too emphasized. Like, oh, it's very dangerous of you to be at work alone. What could happen? What could happen? Well, something could happen to you too if you're at work alone, Mr. Non-disabled person. So leave me alone.
It's true. I feel like this too has to do with, there's a word for it. Is it infantile? There's like a word. Treating people like children. So like this thing too, and I know it's starting, again, people just need education and awareness, right? So we're kind of moving away. People are saying right now, hey, don't say I have a mental age of 5. I don't like that. Right? I really don't like that either. I don't want anybody saying I have a mental age of 12. Even I might have the skills of a 12-year-old in certain areas. Let's not. My parallel parking is
yes, my math skills are very low on the whatever scale it is in.
right. But let's not do that. Everybody has like strengths, areas of strengths and areas of weakness. And that's why we're looking out for each other, and bad things happen to people all the time. And yes, we want to protect people, but we also don't want people to be exploited, and we want people to have choices. So I think too, me in education, I'm really about choice and freedom, and that's dangerous. Choices and freedom, and learning to think for yourself and being responsible. How do you learn to be responsible and to make responsible choices? You have to actually be given the opportunity to make choices, and then also have the consequences. And the consequences are good things, and the consequences are bad things. Exactly. So I think about Alex choosing his own life. Like, this is where it was really important. So during COVID, everything went to Zoom. And Alex made the choice that school was not for him. And so this is a big deal, because in New Jersey, they had sort of compensatory services where people who were in school and were supposed to graduate at a certain age got an extra year. So he could have graduated, instead of at 21, he could graduate at 22. And at 20, Alex had decided, you know what, this is not for me anymore. And I disagreed. I actually disagreed with that. And I was like, look, I think you should still go to school. I think it's kind of important to go to school. And then the whole team got together, and I was outvoted. So we're still on the books, and he's like somehow like still in there. I was like, well, wait, because I know we need to do like a certain amount of exit testing just for adult life to have certain things in place. So we're on the books as being somewhere, but he stopped attending Zoom. And when it went into in person, everybody was just like not getting on, which he used to take an ambulance to school too, not getting on the ambulance to go to school. Not getting in the 7 a.m. ambulance, out the street to go to this program. He was done. And so, right. So if I had guardianship, I'd be like, it's 7 a.m. Get on that bus, right? If it's up to me and no one else
get on that ambulance.
Right, get on the ambulance for you. What do you mean you don't want to go on that ambulance to go drive an hour?
Yes. But so that's interesting. So with supportive decision making, do things literally go to a vote? Like if people disagree, is it like, does everybody
they lobby me? There's lobbying that happens.
This is so cool to me. So people, it's like our board meeting. It's like people make their case, and then you have to vote on whether you think it's the best way to go. So I just think that's so cool and so empowering. And I love that example, because you can make the argument that Alex made the wrong decision. Like, to you were like, this is not the right decision. But then, people go, oh, that's horrible. But then you're like, wait a minute. People make decisions every day that people think, especially their parents, don't agree with. I mean, just think about in your own life, your loved ones all the time, you disagree. I don't know. Why are they dating that person? Why are they working that job? Why are they moving there? But that's their right as a person. And when we're talking about ableism, which I want to keep going back to, it's assumed with people with disabilities that we don't know a lot of the times. Like, oh, Alex can't know what's best for him. But he does have an opinion, and he does have a right to say, you know what? Because think about what Susan's saying. There are benefits to him going to school, a lot of them. But from Alex's point of view, I've been doing it a long time. It's a lot for me to get on an ambulance, go through a whole production, or it's a production of getting and going and doing this thing. So he's like, I'm over it. I remember they said to me when I was graduating, they were like, well, you could stay here till you're 21. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that because I want to graduate with my, friends. So luckily, nobody put up a fight about it. But you're right. That's what we're talking about. And I want people to understand, if you're just listening to this podcast and kind of new to the disability world, or like, oh, ableism, is this really, I never heard of that. Is this really a thing? What we're talking about is radical in the disability world. Like, it is still a new thing, that consequences, and people with disabilities have the right to their own consequences and the right to things that don't work out. Like, I remember going on this big rant one time about, I have the right to fail too. Like, everybody else gets to fail. Like, what, why, when people with disabilities fail, is it seen as this horrible thing instead of the learning experience that it is for everybody else? So I really like that story, and I think it's awesome. And how do we normalize kind of just people with disabilities making choices? Like, how do we?
I know. You know
like,
what? And honestly, it's everybody. This is like why I'm so interested in education and sort of like respecting even very young children. There's the equalizer. I think about babies are kind of like right. Everybody's sort of like on a level playing field as a baby of not being able to do too much and really needing like full care, right? And then you have toddlers, right? And then we have like preschoolers. And then it seems like sort of gaps and differences are more able to be seen the older that people get. So I think about if this idea of like, let's normalize like giving responsibilities to young children and listening to children and letting people try things and letting people in kindergarten make decisions. And that's why I think this is sort of a constructivist approach to education, which I'm a really big believer in, which is allowing people, like making education very personal so people can put concepts together to help them to learn, and then including people with disabilities starting in, childcare and preschool and early elementary. And then I know as, time goes on, people might need extra things. They might need to have pullout. Some people, there's always going to be people who are going to need like very specialized programs. So it's not going to work in the gen ed classroom 100%. But I think that is really a big part of this. And I think about when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, where were the disabled people? I was like,
there were no disabled people, Susan. They weren't there. No, they were isolated and put somewhere else. So, but they were there.
And I think I think a lot of the stuff I learned from you is a lot of your solutions are based on sort of always going to the least restricted environment. So yeah, like Alex, he does need some support, but instead of going right to like guardianship, which takes away all his freedom, let's give him supportive decision making where we have the support and kind of a little bit of protection and a little bit of help, but it's least restricted, so he gets what he needs. And I think the same thing for classes too. I was lucky enough, I was mainstream. I still remember the meeting in kindergarten where I was there for some reason, and I still remember them saying to my parents, yeah, he's going to be mainstream. And I had no idea what that meant. I was in kindergarten. I was like, I'm going to play with these blocks. So I still remember that. I always think about how lucky I was because, again, it communicating an expectation to me like, no, you're going to be with everybody else. So, and I think that was really important. And I think, again, not everybody's like me, and my disability was different, and, all the caveats that people always throw in. But we should be trying to always integrate and help people be more a part and not less, because I think that's so important of just helping people realize that you are normal like everybody else. And by normal, I mean like disabilities is a real thing, and you may have to do things differently, but you can still be a part of this instead of like, oh, you guys go into this separate classroom and you guys aren't on this track to go to college or whatever. And all that stuff, it just sends that just ableism message of like, you're different, there's something wrong. And I think that is really, those are the little things that people don't realize that I think we're getting better at recognizing. Like, no, it's not a good thing to send that message to people, because people internalize that and then they start to believe certain things about themselves. Like, oh, I can't live independently, or I can't be more independent, which isn't true in a lot of, I would say most cases. I've still yet to find a person with a disability who can't have any power. I've yet to find this person, Susan. I'm told they exist, but when I talk to them, I'm like, no, they need help with this area, this area, this area, but they can still do this part of it. So, and like you said, Alex is top 4 in New Jersey, and he's doing his thing. So
he's doing his thing. Just like give him what he needs, right? Just give people what they need.
So, I just think we got to really think about that stuff. I want to talk to you a little bit about the pandemic, because this is always a very fascinating subject to me, kind of the ableism that exists in our pandemic response. And I just want to know what your thoughts, because one of the things that always kind of sets me off, and there are many things in this world, but, when I've had people say, just casually, oh, don't worry, the only people dying from COVID are people with pre-existing conditions, which one isn't true. And two is a really disgusting thing to say if you think about it. Because it's like when people say pre-existing condition, I'm like, oh, you mean people with some type of disability or some type of something, and they don't count. So kind of how do you think the pandemic has really shown kind of the shortfall sometimes of how society values disabled lives? And it's kind of like the way people talk about it, sometimes it's like people with disabilities are disposable. And I just wanted to let you have the floor and kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially now with the mask mandate, I just feel like, and I've been talking about it this week with people, just that I'm like, wow, I guess everybody's just come to the place of a decision of a certain percentage of people are going to get very sick and die, and that's okay. That people are just okay with that, right? And of course, who is that? That's people with like healthcare issues, people with disabilities. So they're saying, you know what, and like elderly and the elderly, they're like, I think
Yeah.
we're okay with like 10% of the people.
Yeah, I've heard people say, well, the elderly, they were going to die anyway. Like,
It's awful, isn't it? It's awful. Yes,
Yes.
I think about the entire thing of COVID and like how difficult it's been. Like, so for me, even, I'm one of those people who lost their job during COVID. They could not accommodate me. So I lost my job and now I work like 5 jobs. And how impossible that is. It's just an impossible situation. And the judgment even of like, oh, what do you mean you had to leave that job? Right now you're marked as one of the people who had to leave because of COVID stuff. Right?
What do you mean?
Marked.
What do you mean you had to leave that job during a deadly pandemic, once in a century pandemic? You should.
They were going to let you just be with 500 people at a time and no mask.
Yes.
Like, why? What's wrong with you? Right now you're marked. So now there are people, right, who are like, wow, I had to leave. So that's already outing me as like being weak. So I'm already like outed as being weaker than other people. And then people like, that's what I've noticed too, especially if you've been trying to like find employment during this time, how things are trending, right? You might have health needs. You might have a disability. You might need accommodation. I don't know. I think I'm going to go with that young, healthy person over there and not like this disabled person who's going to like have higher healthcare costs. So there's like so many layers of this. I think too, like the good thing that came out of it is now everybody's doing Zoom meetings. Now, if somebody has an in-person meeting, I'm like, why?
I know.
Why?
I'm instantly annoyed. If you tell me I gotta go in person. It's just to show ableism too. Like people with disabilities have been asking for alternatives to in-person meetings from like the beginning of time, and we were always told that it was the hardest thing. Like we were asking somebody to recreate the Eiffel Tower from scratch. But this pandemic happened, and all of a sudden it starts affecting our non-disabled friends. And all of a sudden, wow, guys, this is incredible. We got to be more accommodating. Yeah, I know Susan and Donald have been saying that forever. So I just hope people don't go backwards in that sense. And I really want people to think about what they're saying when they make comments like, oh, it's only the elderly, or oh, it's only people with pre-existing conditions. Like, first of all, guys, that's sick and a little, a dark side of human nature that we really have to fight against, that urge to just be like, well, it's not me, so who cares? And 2, just if you want to make the selfish argument, 1 in 5 people have a disability. So you're going to have a disability too, maybe one day too, or somebody you love. So don't go out promoting this stuff that, as long as it's not me. Well, it might not be you now, but it might be you later. So I just really want to encourage people to take those precautions. And I know it's tough. Look, I'm over the pandemic. We're all over the pandemic. Who's not over the pandemic? The virus really doesn't care though. Like it really doesn't, it's not taking a vote, So just, we still got to take precautions and be careful and be cognizant of people we're around and do the things we got to do. And also I would encourage employers and people working, still be accommodating with people. Like you should have a work from home procedure in place. And I understand sometimes there are jobs where work from home is not a realistic alternative, but really think about it. And my thing is, I always tell people, people are like, again, back to the ableism of like supervision and everybody's, how do you know people are working if they're working from home? Look, if people don't want to work, they're not working in your office either. Like people who do their jobs and get stuff done, you can put them anywhere and they get stuff done. So and there are a way to include checks and balances in that. So again, that ableism in our system, and also what Susan was saying, when you hear people say, well, I had to leave my job because of the pandemic, like don't assume that that's a horrible
that everybody was questioning everything. Like, especially that beginning of the pandemic, it felt like the world was ending. Like, are we going to have a tomorrow? So I don't know, but I just hope people question their underlying assumptions about all this stuff, because I think it's so important. And if we have a more inclusive world, we will have people with disabilities contributing more, which will help us all. So we really have to think of, I loved your phrasing of, I was one of the weak ones.
It could be viewed as that. I should have been in there, get sick with everybody else,
But again,
yeah, I'm such a quitter. I was a quitter.
Yes. But that's kind of the ableism and just the things that people say that I'm like, oh.
And we all have it. Even people with disabilities have internalized ableism. It's not like Susan and I are pure, angels, but we have to be aware of it and kind of think about it and kind of understand, because we've all grown up in this society that, although has in a lot of ways given us a lot of great things and allowed us to thrive in certain ways, it shouldn't have been as hard for us to thrive. It's kind of how I think about it in a lot of ways. So I always, my final question is always, and if you can't think of anything, it's okay. If you could wave your magic wand, if I could make you like empress for the day and you could change 3 policies kind of at the national level, like, what would they be? What are those policies that drive you crazy? It doesn't have to be 3. You can go for 2, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
Maybe one. Honestly, you know what? It's really like a big deal. Like, I think like with like civil rights for people with disabilities, ADA, Section 504, it always has to do with like, you have to disclose and then you have to fight for your rights. And then
Yes.
hope like many years later that somebody will like grant you your thing. So I wish that like there were laws that were actually enforced and not just like suggestions of like, we really would love for you to have civil rights, but we're really not going to enforce that you have civil rights. So
Right.
being able to get accommodation. So, right. I think about like, there have been times where I've been on the job and I've asked for the accommodation of things like having access to a chair at my job. I've had to ask for that.
Who needs chairs? Chairs? This is out of control. These people with disabilities.
This was in Atlantic County, by the way.
Out of control.
Right. I was working 30 hours a week. So it was considered part-time. It wasn't considered full-time. Also, those are the things too. You know what really bothers me too? This is ableist. Part-time work and part-time work not being valued. Who's going for part-time jobs? Who values that part-time job? People with physical disabilities
Yes.
who physically can't do. And it's so sad because what I've realized of like part-time versus full-time, you get rights. Part-time, you get no rights, and also you don't get access to the chair that everybody else gets.
Yeah.
A desk and a chair, you get to stand and work and get no breaks and get no job protections and get and no health benefits and none of the things that people enjoy. So I would say, yeah. So things like civil rights, I would love for it to have like civil rights that were automatic and everyone agreed and it was enforced. And then I think part-time work to be valued. So if health benefits were a universal thing so that you didn't have to work a full-time job, that you could work part-time. And I think this idea of pensions only being tied to full-time work too, really would help people with disabilities too. I think too, the thing that being disabled and being in poverty are so closely connected. So if you are living off of Social Security and Medicaid, like somebody like Alex, you can't have more than $2,000 in access or you lose your stuff. So I know there's able accounts and things like that, but to even like, find ways to allow people with disabilities to work part-time, since we are work first, not get penalized, have access to health benefits. These are the things, and have access to like housing and buying and purchasing houses. That's how people acquire wealth. So putting people, we're in Section 8 housing because you got Social Security, because you got Medicaid, right? It's just poverty,
Yeah.
not having good healthcare, access to good healthcare because you've got Medicaid only, and where you can go, you can't leave the state of New Jersey, not having civil rights, not having your rights enforced. There's so many things, but I also always acknowledge the people that we stand on the shoulders of the people in front of us who worked so hard. So when did people with disabilities get civil rights? I was a senior in high school. So why did my parents hide my disability? Because I didn't even have civil rights. I wasn't even seen as a full human until I was like 17 or 18 years old because I had a disability. So I the time that we are is so much better. It's so much better. And I know 20 years from now, it's going to be so much better.
And I just think there's so much important in what you said, because it's so important to acknowledge the work as we're talking about just the difficulties, but the work that was laid down is why somebody like Alex can live the life he's living, and why somebody like me could go to law school and get a degree and then run a center for independent living and have cool conversations like this. Because it, 70s, 60s, they would have been like, sorry, Donald, you're going to this institution. Law school, disabled people can't do law. What? So, it's just so important to acknowledge that. All your recommendations are right. These civil rights laws need to be better, have more teeth to them in terms of letting people enforce them. And also what you said about how, people are like, why are these people with disabilities, a lot of them, there's such a high unemployment rate. I'm like, guys, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons, because all your benefits is tied to not working. Like when people are like, well, just get a job. Well, if I lose my health insurance, my basic income, and my housing, no, it's not because I'm lazy. It's because I'm logical. That's why I'm not working. So we got to move up the allowable limits of savings for people with disabilities. We got to not take away people's disabilities, benefits right away when they start working. There should be we should extend those trial work periods and stuff like that, so people don't automatically get the penalty right away. And when you were talking, I love able accounts, but when you were talking about, I'm so glad you said this. This is why I like talking to you, because this is the truth to it. Able accounts are also very complicated to sign up for, and they're so new. So what are the policy recommendations I would always do is, if we're going to have these able accounts, why can't we be automatically enrolled? Like when we get SSI, like why is it got to be like, oh, you got to go talk to this person? Like, again, we have to play the scavenger hunt game of trying to navigate all this. Like, again, I love able accounts. I'm glad they exist, but they're not easy to understand and easy to get access to a lot of times. So that's the type of stuff I would improve. A lot of these things that require you to have a disability, have an onset or a diagnosis before a certain age, I think are really discriminatory for people and really hurt a lot of people, because a lot of people don't find out they have a disability for the longest time, assuming that people have the support system where they can get a diagnosis as ableist as well, because you need to have, I always think if I didn't have the parents I've had or the loved ones I've had, like you could have just said, you could have not gotten me what I needed, if I was unlucky enough to have that. So we just got to really think about these things, but those are just some great places to start, and really thinking about allowing people more housing. One of my pet peeves too, and I'll close with this, people are like, there's not enough housing for people with disabilities. Well, we need to build more accessible housing, and, to give people with disabilities more options. And a lot of people go, oh, well, of course I'm for housing. Well, next time somebody's proposing a housing development or a low-income thing in your neighborhood, make sure you show up to those meetings and defend those people, because there are a lot of people that'll say, oh, I want housing, just not in my backyard. Put it over there, and then you wind up with a housing shortage and people not being able to find housing. So that's the stuff I would encourage people. And Susan, thank you so much for being with us today. You really gave us, you and I could talk, we could have a 3-hour podcast about all the different things going on in the world, but I'll let you go because you got to go, help me, right the world slowly but surely. But thank you for joining us, and I'll definitely have you on again soon. I'll see you at the next board meeting or whatever.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye.